This is Extemporaneously, presented by Jacobin Brothers. And now, Mark Jacobin. Prior to every presidential election, a gaggle of strange individuals emerges from the morass to predict whom the next president might be. As a society, we place a peculiar value on the ability to predict future events. Not because of an affinity for the mystical, but because our lives are governed by cause and effect, and the intricate relations among cause, effect, and the cascade of causes and effects that issue from each cause and effect. A person who can analyze this seemingly infinite causality matrix with sufficient skill can predict what follows. And this is why every 4 years an endless parade of pundits and shills drag out their marker boards, charts, and graphs to predict the next president. Not because it really matters who the next president is, but because the ability to predict the future based on quantitative analysis is a marketable skill, and a point of pride. In today's episode, we will make some predictions of our own, based on analysis of the infinite causality matrix, reading the tea leaves, and some old-fashioned guesswork. I am Mark Jacobin, along with my brother James, and this is Extemporaneously. James, are you prepared to make your prediction about whom the next president will be during this episode?
No. Wait, was the question, do I want to make one? What is my prediction? I'm sorry, I was sidetracked by reality. You said something about quantitative, and I immediately wrote down a note that said, who gives a
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to make this brief, and then we can just wrap the show, cue the music. Your new president, the new boss, will be same as the old boss. Your 45th president will now be your 47th president, and everyone that bought those MAGA 45 hats off to buy new ones. Donald J. Trump, that's just the data. It's not my personal opinion. As everyone knows, I'm not voting in this election. It's going to be former President Trump. All hail Commander-in-Chief.
So he'll be 45 and 47.
And I think if you combine those two numbers, that's how old he'll be when his term is over.
Oh, wow.
That is, unless there's another one-time only failure of the Secret Service.
So he would be the first president to serve split terms since who?
Grover Cleveland, back in the late 1800s.
Grover Cleveland, and now you have that name stuck in your head.
Yeah, and we're going to do a show about him. He was a character. He was able to do it, obviously much different time. And now we're seeing it again, Mark. We're seeing it again. The last two single-term presidents, outside of Trump, prior to that, Papa Bush retired, and Jimmy Carter got retired by Ronald Reagan. Went on to have the longest post-presidency of any president ever. And I think James Earl Carter is still with us somewhere down in Georgia.
The numbers right now are pointing to a Trump victory, especially if you factor in the margin of errors that these polls always seem to have. I believe it was you that said the polls are never right.
Most of them aren't. Even the polls on when people go to the polls and vote, sometimes those aren't right either, depending on depending on which cable news network you're downloading. Well, because a lot of them are putting their finger on the scale. And we're now, this used to be just a Democrat thing. Now you're seeing the Republicans start to do it a little bit as well, because they now have a control of a subset of underground media and websites and podcasts. So these polls have turned into more what the pollster wants the answer to be than what the actual scientific, as you would say, quantitative result of a poll should be. So since we know we can't rely on those as the only determining factor, those of us who actually are interested in this and want to see if we can correctly place the pieces on the chessboard with actual data and information, and then yes, we have to be a little predictive and a little speculative because I don't have 100 people working for me calculating data. So Trump is going to win. He's going to clear 300 electoral votes. Two things I know for certain. He's going to flip Nevada for the first time since 2004. Only two Republicans have taken Nevada in a very long time. The Bush boys, Papa Bush back in 92 and his son in 2000, 2004. Here's why he takes Nevada. And why are we talking about Nevada? Because Nevada is key. Nevada has, I believe, upwards of 16, 17 counties. 16 are red, and one is blue. That's Clark County, covers Las Vegas. Metropolitan areas tend more Democratic. Now, we covered this in lecture 4 years ago that Idaho and could be going this way. But here's what happened in Nevada. which was surprising, but also the Democrats will have no one to blame but themselves, specifically Gavin Newsom, the old governor out there in the great state of California. He drove so many people out of California, and the ones who happen to be Republican in the last 4 years have settled across the state line in Nevada. So tens of thousands of new Republicans registered in Nevada. And the other key data point here in Nevada, early voting, something Republicans never do, especially not in the last election. Early voting, according to the Secretary of State, is favoring Republicans by 50,000 people, voters. And Trump only lost the state by several thousand votes last time. Early voting is not mail-in voting. Early voting is the polls open a week before Tuesday, so for several days now. You go and you vote in person. It's the same as voting on election day. This is huge for Republicans, and I mean massive. He's going to win Nevada. He's going to win Arizona. That's most of the game right there. The only path to victory, and I said this about Biden, and I say it about Harris, and I would have said it about whoever they trotted out there against the Trumper, is Pennsylvania. Only way VP Harris can take down the Electoral College. I don't care about the popular vote. This is an electoral vote game. Pennsylvania. She loses Pennsylvania, and Madam Vice President is going to be former Madam Vice President here in a few months. And the polling that had Trump down significantly in 2016, and he won Pennsylvania. The polling had him down by a few points in 2020, and he lost Pennsylvania. For the first time in his political career, he's polling 1 point ahead, and I'm looking at the same poll I've been looking at for 9 years. That leads me to believe he's going to win Pennsylvania rather comfortably. And we know the Democrats are worried about it because they have spent more money, time, and resources in Pennsylvania than anywhere else.
Well, I've heard they have an opportunity economy in Pennsylvania. That's what they replaced their steel with.
Oh, are they eating the dogs there too?
I don't know. If you wrote a book about these two characters, no one would buy it because they wouldn't think it would be believable.
Well, we used to watch movies, and whatever actor was playing the president, they would say, "This isn't believable. No one could believe XYZ as president." I think they believe it now.
Harrison Ford played president once. Why don't we put him in the Oval Office? He did a good job pretending to be president.
Hell, he threw someone out of a moving airplane.
That's right. I am not going to make a prediction about who's going to win because I haven't been studying the numbers. But I will make a number of other predictions that I have a high amount of confidence in. And the first one, regardless of the final tally, you are going to see a record Republican turnout. This is not earth-shattering revelation. For a Republican president to win, they need to get a lot of Republicans. Proportionally, more Republicans have to turn up to the ballot box than Democrats. That's just the way it is based on the distribution of the population across the country. So you're going to see a record Republican turnout. You're going to see more people vote for Trump this time around than last time around. The second prediction I will make is that there will be verifiable occurrences of election interference, voter fraud, whatever you want to call it. Will it be enough to change the election? That remains to be seen. But I think, unlike last time around where people weren't really paying attention, I think this time around people really are paying attention, not just a certain segment of the Republican population, but you've got a lot more people scrutinizing what's going on at the ballot boxes because nobody wants to believe that our democratic process has been compromised. Even people that vote Democratic that I've talked to, they're not interested in violating this most sacred of American traditions, right? Because if we can't have a secure election, then we may as well just put a king in the Oval Office and forget about it. The third thing that you're going to see, regardless of who wins, is a lot of violence. I think you're going to see violence in several cities, perhaps a lot of violence. I think if Trump loses, you're going to see a tremendous amount of violence because you're talking about a population that has been convinced over the last 8 years that there is an establishment that is out to get Trump. There's a lot of evidence to support that conclusion. But you also have a lot of belief in things that are less easily believed in, such as the fact that the last election was stolen from Trump. The numbers to support that conclusion aren't there, but a great many Americans believe in the inevitability of that occurrence. You can't convince them otherwise that election wasn't stolen. And I think if Trump loses again, with or without any real evidence, these people are going to be very upset. And I think the fourth thing, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is that future history will consider this to be a turning point in American society. When they look at where they are in 2050, they're going to say, yes, the election in 2024 is where things changed. They may change for the better, they may change for the worse. Given everything that's at stake, the policies that are being put forth by these presidents, the policies that are being driven home by the military-industrial complex, by the establishment, by the federal government, by big business, by big pharma, you're going to see things change drastically from this point forward. That change may not be as evident while you're living it, but by 2030, 2035, you're going to look back at 2024 and you're going to say, yeah, that was the point in time where things shifted radically. I would say it's going to be as radical a shift as we saw when Reagan was elected in 1980. And it's not just about the president, it's about the whole course of world events. And when Reagan was elected, the course of world events changed, not just because of Reagan, but it coincided with Reagan. The course of world events in 2024 is going to change, is going to coincide with that election, not necessarily be caused by it. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. You're referring to when massive change happens, the people who are currently living, you don't really understand the impact. And sometimes it's happening. The people that lived in the Civil War era didn't realize that we've now gone to a two-party system. The people that lived during the New Deal era of the 30s didn't realize that we'd forever have entitlement programs. The people that voted or didn't vote in the 2000 election didn't realize that this would light the fuse for the degradation of politics of personal destruction, the downfall of decency in political campaigns, the quality of candidates that could be put forth, and what it took to get elected. You said something that's very intriguing. You feel strongly that there's going to be civil unrest. And let me paint that picture. You're talking violence, you're talking beatings, you're talking deaths, you're talking...
I'm not talking about people in the street holding up signs. Let me put it that way.
You did mention that if Trump wins, and you listed all the reasons, so I'll let that sit there. But what about if Vice President Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz hold the executive office for the Democrats? And according to their own statements, both in the past and currently, they're going to push an agenda. This agenda would seemingly inflame the Republicans specific to fanatical Trump. But what if Trump wins? And he wins easily, and he wins on election night. In my judgment, I could be wrong, so people please feel free to message me, is Republicans tend to impulsively riot. See January 6th. Although there was some planning, a lot of people were there just to be there, and then things got out of hand, and it was what it was. Democratic activists, it's a full-time job. Are they somewhere in a room right now today before the election saying, no matter if it's a clean election, no matter how decisive a Trump victory might be, a hypothetical Trump victory, do they take to the streets in planned opposition marches, protests, and planned violence?
I would say yes, because that's their MO. We know that there's no such thing as a grassroots movement in the Democrat Party. There's planning, there's funding, there's coordination, there's busing in of demonstrators. This happens on both sides. Everybody does this. The difference is that on the Democrat side, you see planned opposition in concert with violence. And violence that is either A, they turn a blind eye, or B, it's actually encouraged by the establishment. So I think that election night, if it starts going badly for the Democrats, you're going to see planned violence.
Planned or impulsive violence, none of this is good, especially political violence. This takes us backwards or puts us on the same par with all these smaller, what we'd call sometimes third world countries or fledgling democracies, where no matter the result of the political election, they automatically try and overturn it, either judicially or through flat-out coup attempts. So you're saying we're on the road to this?
Oh, yes. We have been on the road to a banana republic for 10 years. And while academically Trump has some very good policy planks in his platform, from a personal perspective, he behaves like a third world dictator. And I don't think that Trump understands the difference.
Right. And I've been saying the same thing about Trump since the summer of his final year in office is he's not dangerous because of what his detractors say. He's dangerous because he doesn't understand government. And he doesn't understand that the bully pulpit and the bullhorn that he possesses lands with people. I don't think he has malice in his heart. Because if he does, then everything negative said about him is true. I think he's highly naive, highly egotistical. And through his own admission, when he first got elected, he said this on Joe Rogan podcast 3 days ago, he didn't know how to run the government. And this is the problem, because being a politician is a job. Being a president is a job. And although he may have this fantastic skill set, and he's a fantastic entertainer, he's fantastically funny, and he can be charming privately, and he certainly can get tens of millions of people to vote for him, he doesn't know how to run the country. Now, as far as Harris goes, we don't know, because Vice President Harris says the same thing over and over again, which is nothing. Now, we assume that she's going to continue on with recent stretching further left politics. So say this civil unrest does happen. Is it containable, or do we have what we had when Trump lost last time, which was 4 years of this? Are we looking at 4 more years of the election never ends, the negativity never ends, and happiness never ends?
There is no scenario where this gets better. If Kamala wins, Trump doesn't retreat into the wings, not by a long shot, neither do his supporters. I think if Trump loses, he's back in 4 years, or at least makes an attempt. If Trump wins, then you have what we had for 4 years, which is the mass media constantly harping on the president, day in and day out. Whatever Trump does is wrong, and Trump will fuel that fire by making Diet Pepsi-fueled tweets at 3 a.m. in the morning. If you have an unstable president who insists on tweeting nonsense in the wee hours, after it happens 5 or 6 times, it's not news, right? But they don't see it that way. They're going to continue to harp on that. The Trump presidency will be a failure, not because of the candidate, but because people will make sure that it's a failure either in reality or by perception.
Those are all fascinating points, and let us all hope for the sake of the country and us as individuals that you're wrong. I'm rooting that you're wrong.
Well, James, on the next show, why don't you get out your list of all the times I've been wrong?
Specific to presidential elections, since we started the show, we can review the list. You haven't. In 2016, you were one of 2 individuals that I'm aware of who would say it publicly that predicted a Trump victory. One was a member of a very well-known news organization, and you, a member of the greatest bicoastal podcast that no one's ever heard of. But I digress. You predicted Trump, you predicted a Biden victory in 2020, yet you're hesitant to make a prediction now. Is that because you're like the quarterback who doesn't want to throw an interception and lose your perfect record, or because you can't see the data through the chaos?
I don't think the data are reliable enough to draw a conclusion from them. There are far too many variables to create a reliable algorithm. In 2016, it was easy. There was this groundswell of enthusiasm. People finally had a candidate that they thought was going to go to the mat for them, and they got behind him. In 2024, it's a very different story. Trump still has his core, but he can't be president without the middle. And nobody really knows where the middle is because nobody's talking to them and nobody's listening to them.
I've been talking to them, and I'm listening. And this is another factor on why Trump wins. Forget everything I said about Nevada, Arizona, and data that's attainable. Trump has softened subtly after 9 years. This stubborn, egotistical human being who the people who adore him, he never changes. He doubles down. He triples down. Build the wall. Build it higher. Lock her up. Lock him up. Lock everybody up. Enemies list, all of it. He did change. And this is even pre-shooting. He did a very smart strategic political maneuver. He pivoted to the middle after the conventions on issues that are very important to middle America. One, hot button issue, abortion. He pivoted. He broke with the Christian right. They don't seem to care. They're going to vote for him no matter what. He took it out of the official Republican platform. He separated himself from the Supreme Court ruling. And this is what's hitting home. He's softened on this issue. Because what people aren't seeing in the big cities is the political ads that are running in rural America. I'm seeing them. I'm listening to them. The Trump you see on TV at these events talking about possibly maybe having Dick Cheney's daughter shot in the face by Dick Cheney, that's not happening.
Now, James, according to what I'm hearing in the news, if Trump is president, he's going to round up all the women and have them sent to Australia.
Exactly. Because the Democrats know they're dead in the water without the female vote, which they've controlled by a 10-plus point margin for decades. And rightfully so, I might add. Trump is now looking to cut into that. He just needs to cut into it by 1 or 2 points, and that's the ball game. He doesn't need to cut the whole 10 points today. The other thing he's doing Let's go into places like California. Very quietly in 2020, although he lost, and he lost clearly, is this. He got a higher percentage of Latino vote than any Republican candidate ever, to include the reelection of George W. Bush. There are now Latino and Hispanic Congress people all over the country, Republican. He just needs to bring the Latino vote margin up a wee bit, and he's doing that, to prevail based on the other things I said. The other factor that no one will talk about for reasons unknown to me, the black vote. That's been a shoe and lock and stock barrel for Democrats since '64 in the Civil Rights Act. Obama took it to levels 90-95%. Biden got some of that back. Kamala Harris is pulling well with black women and pulling horrendously with black men. Although 14 to 15% of registered voters are African American, if you lose just 1 to 2 points on that, they just don't show up. Or if they show up and secretly vote for Trump, or none of the above, or write in Bobby Kennedy. You couple that with the increase in Latino voters, the lack of enthusiasm on the Democratic side, the numbers in Nevada, the numbers in Arizona, and like I said in 2020 on the live election show, it's back to the White House we go, and we didn't start the fire.
Because it doesn't matter how many Democrats vote for the Democrat candidate in California or New York. What matters is how many vote in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona.
And this is why the media is tripling down on the Nazi threats and the arresting women for, even trying to procure birth control, is because they're scared. They're in a gator death roll in their campaign. They're trying to hold on. But what's happening when I'm talking to people, Mark, and I now work in a job where I'm talking to people from all over the country. I'm fortunate in that sense. For the first time in 9 years, people are openly talking about voting for Trump. Openly. And people are openly, who are Democrats, saying, well, he's not that bad. Some of them. That's why they're trying so hard to keep the Trump is the Nazi narrative so they can excite the voters to get them out. They're trying to scare the hell out of them.
Yeah, I think a week ago, there were 5,500 references to Hitler about Trump nationally.
And to get something to land with somebody in an advertising sense, you have to repeat it 5 times. To get something to land with someone in an advertising sense, you have to repeat it 5 times. That's to get the brand recognition. You can go over the dam. Example, Coca-Cola. The brand is so well known that you forget about it. So they're in a constant struggle, even though it's one of the biggest trademark brands in the world. Any mistake they make is amplified and cuts heavy into it. Any new product that comes out, you can advertise too much. And when you say Trump is Hitler, 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 it's like a song you play over in your head again. People just tune it out.
It no longer has value. It becomes noise.
Right. And then as the water flows down the river, it becomes a benefit for Trump, because then it emboldens his fan base, and he does have fans, and also emboldens Republicans who voted for him in 2016, abandoned him in 2020, and are now back. And they're back because they've seen 4 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They don't like it. So now they've seen Trump and Biden. There's no way to crack Harris from Biden, although they've tried. They've tried their best, but it's impossible. Trump ran on his record in 2020, lost. Harris is running on Biden's record right now, going to lose.
Well, see, the challenge with separating Harris from Biden is that you have to have a difference in their platforms. And since neither one had a platform, it's hard to establish a difference. Their only platform was not Trump. That platform is running out of value.
Well, it ran out of steam. That's why Barack Obama and George Clooney fired Joe Biden. You notice the Harris campaign abandoned, for the most part, anything but Trump. They're still hitting the Hitler thing. And the only reason I can see that is because most people have heard of Hitler, and Hitler bad. And Hitler was the worst genocidal murder in maybe the history of the modern world.
Here's the thing that many people will see through, is that Trump has already been president once. He wasn't Hitler. It wasn't Mussolini. He wasn't even George W. Bush.
Yeah. Him and Dick Cheney, right? The co-presidency. You can get people to believe certain things, but sometimes you can't get them to not believe their own eyes. Trump was president. I didn't like him. But in a sense, not much happened. The complete chaos came after the election. Now, should that have been a regular election cycle, disqualified Trump from being president from the voters? It should have. Here's the key mistake. When you do the autopsy of this election that the Democratic Party made, the big D, the Democratic infrastructure, they attempted to smear Trump, get him arrested, and remove him from the political playing field. He was dead in the water. But case after case brought his base back. And then it brought the big donors. And then it brought Elon Musk. Because everybody can relate. Everyone knows someone, if not themselves, who they feel has been wrongly prosecuted or pushed around. And if they can push around and falsely accuse Trump, they can do it to anyone. And then they come out and say, well, if Trump gets elected, he's going to take a vendetta against his political opponents. And a reasonable person would say, you mean like you did?
Yeah.
I don't know enough about his criminal cases to comment one way or the other, but I do know the political ramifications. I'm a political analyst. I'm not a criminal justice expert.
One of the things that's a matter of public record is that they shipped Donald Trump a pallet of documents and then a year later tried to charge him with possession of classified information.
Well, Mark, where I was last week. As you know, I was in Washington, D.C. for the first time.
That's right.
I wanted to see the Capitol before it burned. And I did happen to walk by the records building, and the group of people I was with, they're like, hey, that's where Trump got all the records. Oh, I also was in spitting distance of the Watergate building, which is now apartments. Speaking of tricky dick and chaotic presidencies. So, Mark, we're not in agreement on who's going to win the presidency, but we're in agreement that unless one of these two human beings steps forward after securing the electoral victory on November 6th, 7th, or 8th, however long it takes to tabulate, and truly in their heart appeals for peace and calm and spend a significant chunk of their presidency trying to bring the country together. Because many have tried, all have failed. George W. Bush, I'm a unificator, not a divider. Barack Obama, to the people who didn't vote for me, I need you now more than ever. Didn't work. Donald Trump, I'm the one to solve all the problems.
It's not going to happen, and I'll tell you why. George Lucas.
We're back to Star Wars.
The fans have taken over the property, okay? Star Wars, like you said, success works against you. The Star Wars property was so big and so huge that no one would let George do anything with it. So George said, fine, if you don't like me, I'll sell it to Disney and they'll really trash it. And that's what he did. The Star Wars fans haven't been happy ever since. So it doesn't matter what the presidential candidate says on January 21st or November 3rd or whenever it is we decide that they're the president, because the inertia cannot be stopped. The war that the mass media has started between the factions of the blue and the red has its own inertia, its own momentum, and no one person can control it anymore. That's why this is going to be a red letter election in American history, because those forces have been let loose and you cannot contain them.
Well, on that uplifting note, Mark, well, good luck to our children and our children's children. Okay, I have Trump between 307 and 331 electoral votes. You have the country burning.
We've been talking extemporaneously. This has been Extemporaneously, presented by Jacobin Brothers. For more episodes and content, visit jacobinbrothers.com.